By David Fitzsimons. He's the director of the European Remanufacturing Council.
David, hi Joe, good to be here.
Welcome to the Diff Studio. Now, you advise governments and businesses on remanufacturing. You're part of the MacArthur Foundation's Circular Economy 100 network and advocating recycling, remanufacturing and increasing remanufacturing understanding within that network of businesses and governments. But for those of us who maybe have a bit more of a kind of pigeon understanding of what remanufacturing is, help us define the term.
Lovely. Yep, so remanufacturing is first and foremost taking back a product or a component that has had some life or at the end of its first life, take it back, put it through an industrial process to disassemble it, and then to clean it, take those components that have worn or broken, replace them, reassemble, test, put it back on the market as if it were new or as good as new. That's remanufacturing. The important point is that it's an industrial process, not just a one-off.
Okay, and so when you say industrial process, you mean something that happens kind of at scale, many times?
Yeah, at scale, many times, standardized.
So I guess the clue's in the word as well. When we think of manufacturing,
Yep.
You would think of a production line, perhaps many things being made in an identical way, something that has been refined over the course of the Industrial Revolution. And remanufacturing is like doing that, but bringing old things back to life.
Yeah, I think the way to think about it is we're not after material recycling. We're trying to keep the product or the component in life for longer, principally because if you're just after smashing things up to get the materials back for recycling, there's an enormous loss of value when you start to smash things up. So instead, keep them as whole as you can and put them back to use again. That's the purpose.
So you mentioned recycling, I mentioned it in my garbled intro to the session. Is it an either-or situation?
No.
They
complement
between the two to the uninitiated.
Yeah, there is confusion there, but the two complement one another. Recycling and remanufacturing come together because invariably things come to the end of their lives or they're no longer useful. You want the material recycling to happen. But remanufacturing comes with so many advantages. So let's take some tangible examples. Lots of products, especially in the 21st century, contain small quantities of very important functional compounds and materials that make that equipment work well. Think of lots of electronic equipment, for instance. But not just electronic equipment. Think even of something as basic as a tire. Tires in their production use cobalt. And in electronic products, there are things like rare earths, often mentioned, but lots of very small quantities of compounds which are necessary to make them work. And if you take them back and just smash them up for material recycling, you lose all of those small amounts of compounds, and they tend to get lost in the ferrous mix and the non-ferrous mix, and you lose them forever. And it's a bit like, we've got a kind of mildly crazy economy where we've accelerated entropy. So when these compounds were in the earth and you mine them to get out these very small but very important precious materials to then use in our equipment, if you smash them up for recycling after a short life and they get lost in ferrous and non-ferrous mixes, you'll never get them back again. It was hard enough to find them in the earth, but you'll never get them back from those mixes. And that's what remanufacturing helps to prevent.
At the same time, many companies are working really hard to plunge more money into recycling technologies, and
Yes.
Many of them are very proud of that. Their reports, sustainability reports, things like that will tout great recycling figures. That seems to be a bit of an aspiration for some businesses.
Yep.
So do you have to say to them, stop recycling, stop doing it?
Sometimes I'd say, are you sure that that's the best thing to be doing? It can suit a business to say, we want to sell you a product We want you to hold it for as short a time as possible, then we'll take it back, smash it to pieces, and start again. It's a much more challenging thing to do. So we'll take it back because we're going to recover components to use in the next product, or we're going to upgrade this product so that somebody else can use it again, or that you can use it again.
Okay.
And so I think right now most remanufacturing is in the business-to-business world. The big challenge is how you get it out of business to business into the business to consumer world. And so there are lots of lessons we can learn from B2B, business to business, to apply if we're going to take on this challenge of making it more normal for a product as part of its life cycle to come back, to have its components or itself whole to be put back on the market, remanufactured.
Well, we'll talk about some of the consumer reaction to remanufactured products a bit later.
Yep.
What sort of products are we talking about, though?
What are currently remanufactured? Well, I think I'd put them into a number of categories. The first thing are those traditional products that have been remanufactured for a number of years. People may not be familiar with them, but I guess things like transmissions in vehicles, engines, turbochargers, suspensions, steering components, all those are remanufactured. But think also of things like printer cartridges, for instance, can be remanufactured. Lexmark, for instance, they take back their cartridges, put them through an industrial process, as I've described, and then put those printer cartridges back on the market. They try to keep them as whole as possible. They don't just refill them, but they put them through an industrial process. So there are these traditional remanufacturing activities. I think, for example, SKF doing their ball bearings and industrial bearings, they are remanufactured. And that all goes on quietly in the background. And then increasingly, we're seeing a new range of products which are being brought back for remanufacturing or in new business models where the remanufacturing becomes an important part of that business model. If I could take an automotive example, Volvo is a good example of a company that sees how we are changing the way we're buying vehicles. So they want to, instead of selling us all an individual vehicle, car, Volvo car, they're expecting to sell their cars to an intermediary for shared ownership, particularly in urban areas. And then remanufacturing becomes part of what has now termed value retention as a way of keeping the costs down for managing those assets over a number of years of life. So they embed that remanufacturing activity as part of the value retention in the shared ownership model that they're moving to.
Okay. And you said that it kind of sometimes remanufacturing quietly goes on in the background.
Yes.
Do you think that most people, or do you think people might be using or have used remanufactured products without even knowing about it?
Oh, for sure. So I've never once flown on an aircraft and the pilot says, just to let you know, ladies and gentlemen, about 30% of the components on this aircraft will have been through a remanufacturing process. In fact, the aircraft industry have some of the best remanufacturing activities on the planet. High-speed trains too, same processes, but nobody likes to talk about them because, well, I guess at 30,000 feet, you don't really want to hear about. You want to make sure the remanufacturing has been successful. You don't want it to break whilst you're at that height. And
presumably, you mentioned those industries because those products are really expensive.
Typically, they are very high value, and that's why it happens. But also, there's a safety consideration there because the planned maintenance around an aircraft or a high-speed train, you don't want the component to break in use. So the planned maintenance is there to ensure that it comes back, is remanufactured and tested and put back into service again before it breaks.
Okay. And you've been working on improving understanding of this, and maybe we just linger on that for a moment. You you said that if people were told that some of those components were remanufactured when they're 30,000 feet up, it might not be music to their ears. That's because there are these misunderstandings or preconceptions around what remanufacturing is. So what are you doing to try and change that?
Well, it's a pity, isn't it, that we've got some of these really high quality businesses that are doing this in the aviation sector, the high-speed train area, the automotive sector, the industrial bearings area, for aircraft tyres, and all of these areas where the work is really of the highest standard, and yet the consumer perception of what remanufacturing means is, I think, out of date, a bit backward looking. I think your average person thinks of remanufacturing as an old product that's being kept alive and it's very dirty.
Do you have a sense of why that is?
I think it's almost been accidental. I don't think there's been any concerted effort to change those perceptions and to see the value of remanufacturing, which is partly why, Joe, you'll know that, well, we'll come to the launch in a moment, what we're doing today and what we're trying to do to change those perceptions.
Well, why don't we tell us about it now? So this is part of the Circular Economy 100 network.
Yeah. So
Got it with you.
this document I brought with me today. We're launching it today, aren't we? And Better Than New. It's been a co-project through the CE 100, Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's involved a number of interviews with companies who believe in remanufacturing, led by Michelin, the tyre company, but involving also Teleplan, Schneider Electric, Lexmark, Solvay. If I've forgotten anybody on that list, forgive me or remind me. But they all contributed to the...
I've got them all, actually.
Good, okay. That's full list. And we interviewed them all about what they're doing about remanufacturing, and then pull together the themes, particularly about perception. Why is it that some customers don't see remanufacturing positively? Why, and what could we do about it? And when we reflected on that over several months, we thought actually a good way to start this is to give the title of what we're putting out today, a very short document today, call it Better Than New. Because that's quite, in itself, the title is quite contentious. You'll find some technical people who say, well, that's impossible. How can you take back a product and make it better than new? Because there'll have been things like metal fatigue that require you to test and it can't be better. But that's rather missing the point, isn't it? The product is better than new when it comes back because it gives you all those added benefits that smashing it up, recycling it, or going to do more mining to get materials together to make another new product for you, just don't have. So the remanufactured product comes with a much smaller carbon footprint, much less waste.
Do you mean it's better in not just in performance, but better on a number of other factors as well, depending on what
you step two steps back and look at the wider picture. You end up with a smarter economy, which is the products have got an extended life. And that's what remanufacturing enables. That's what it's about.
And when thinking about that idea of better than new as well, could it also be said that if someone has taken back an old product and gone through the very detailed process that you mentioned at the top of the show, that those extra levels of checks, that could help with reliability, I'd imagine, or something like that.
One of those little facts that people would never know about, but generally in most product categories, the remanufactured product has got a lower failure rate than the new product. So there you are. But who knows that? Nobody. Who's asking? Not many people.
So better than new sounds like it's pretty catchy. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You've done well there. Yeah. Can you foresee this becoming some sort of mark on products for customers, walking down the aisle in a electronics shop and going to the better than new section? Or?
Oh, well, wouldn't that be nice? I don't know about that. I think a lot of people think you need a label to say, look, this is better than new, this is remanufactured. I think there's some new business models coming which will make it just embedded into the business model. You won't need to ask. It will have been remanufactured. It will work. You don't need to ask. But I would love to be able to communicate more clearly to people that you should look for a remanufactured product, demand one, because you get so much more than a new product offers. That's right.
Those are odds, right? You said that it goes on quietly in the background, which has its own positives, that we've all used remanufactured products without even having to be a conscious choice. But at the same time, you want to raise the profile of remanufacturing. So it feels like there's some work to be done there.
There is. And look, the fact of the matter is that the linear economy has had 150 years of legal framework built around it to make it cheaper, faster, as reliable as possible. And what we're asking to do is to change to an economy where it's more normal for a product to come back and to have a second life, parts of it to have a second life. That's normal. And the legal framework around that is not yet there. It is a constraint on a lot of businesses starting in this area. Even when they see a good opportunity, they don't get funding from the bank because the lawyers would say, be careful, et cetera, et cetera. It's one of the things we're identifying and saying we need to change that. If we're really serious about this new economy, we can't just trundle on with the same old regulations, rules that we've had for the last developed over the last 150 years.
We'll come on to policy and regulation in just a moment. We've had a question in from Gary. Thank you, Gary, who has asked, is remanufacturing a bit niche based on some specific industries, aviation, automotive? He's got a point, hasn't he? We keep hearing about the same old things: engines, gearboxes, brake discs, and things like that. Gary's followed up by saying, "What's the most surprising product that can be remanufactured?"
Yeah, great. That's a great question, because generally speaking, it is niche. Right now, of any equivalent manufactured product that is remanufactured, and there are very many more examples than automotive that I've given, it's only about 2%. So only about 2% of a given product that is remanufactured is typically remanufactured. So still niche, very small. The real question is, how much bigger could it be? And in my view, it could be significantly
larger. Well, there's this statistic in the document that's been released today. It has the potential to triple in size by 2050.
By 2030.
By 2030.
Yeah.
My notes are wrong.
So as long as we've got the right framework in place, there are a lot of products that could be which aren't at the moment. They haven't been designed appropriately for it, but could. So some things that you wouldn't recognise necessarily. There's a lovely business called ALEC, A-L-E-C. No one will have heard of ALEC GmbH. It's a German business. They take back. It's an automotive example, I'm sorry to say. I'll have to give you some other examples. I apologise for that.
Poor Gary.
Yes, poor Gary. I'll give you a couple in a second, Gary, where there's a very sophisticated control device. What's nice about the remanufacturing of that, which comes back from Audi's, that is disassembled by robot in a clean room environment. So absolutely a lovely example of what you can do with capital investment rather than labour through a standardised process. And so I'd recommend them as a nice way to look at where we're going to go with the processes. But by way of products, people think this is only for expensive products. It's not. I've given the example of toner cartridges, for instance. They're very low value, and yet they are designed for remanufacture, but not very many are. Most are dumped or recycled. They're not remanufactured, but could be. And if you like, they're a symbolic product of how many more like that could we remanufacture. A lot of IT equipment is remanufactured quietly, servers, for instance. That happens in the background, you wouldn't know about it, but very few consumer-facing electronics are remanufactured. But Teleplan is a company who are members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Teleplan take back telecoms equipment to refurbish and remanufacture. So they're doing it. They'd like to do a lot more. Does that help?
Yeah,
Gary?
I think that helps. Gary, let us know. Has that satisfied your appetite for different examples of remanufacturing? We've got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to change gear a little bit, look at some different aspects of remanufacturing. If we're going to hear about it more, it's not just about the products and materials. There are probably some other considerations. You mentioned this sterile, clean room where robots disassemble things.
Yep.
A lot of people think this is going to be the answer to jobs security in the future, a positive employment picture because we've got more and more people remanufacturing things. What's the connection between remanufacturing and jobs?
Okay. So the new economy, as we're describing it, would include a lot more disassembly and value retention. So a key term there, product value retention. We don't really know how many areas where that could happen and how many jobs it would create. But my view on that is there would certainly be far more jobs in that value preservation work than associated with smashing stuff up and recycling it. We just don't know how many. Likely to be a significant number, but that depends on the capital intensity, where it's located and what scale. So I don't have an answer for that, really, in truth. I'd like to have one, but I haven't really got one that I'm sure about.
And then lastly, I was saying before we kicked off today that probably my first awareness of remanufacturing was going to a remanufacturing conference in World Remanufacturing Summit in Germany.
Yes.
And it was a pretty homogenous group.
Yep.
Lots of male, white engineers, very, very serious. You've spoken a bit today about changing the perception of remanufacturing.
Yep.
What's going on that front as well?
Right, great question. I agree. Most of these conferences, technical conferences, are white men with grey hair, a bit like myself, actually, which is a shame. But there we are. But look, there are some great women working in this area too, who just don't get called out enough. So we all know about Nabil Nasser in the States. We all know about Walter Stahl, of course. We remember Rolf Steinhilper in Germany. But actually, the women in this area are important too. And I'd say, number one, I'd talk about Nancy Brücken, who was at TU Delft and I think is now at Lund. I'd give her a call out. I'd say Peggy Zwolski at Grenoble University in France, really good. We should see more from her. And I think probably there are others too, but I think if I'd start, I'd say, yeah, and also Yan Wang, I suppose, here in the UK, down at the University of Brighton, a real advocate for remanufacturing, but people, these women are typically always, they're not at the front of this discussion, and they should be, which we want to give them a platform to say, if we're going to change the economy, let's not forget that we should be bringing new voices to this as well.
So these are some of the people who are changing the way that we make things and remanufacture things.
Yep.
David, thank you so much for joining
Pleasure.
us here on the Diff today, telling us more about remanufacturing and giving us an overview of where remanufacturing might be going in the future.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, David.